we're doing today is a live podcast. So we've got the Venture Project, that's our space here. We are a co-working space incubator. We work with startups and entrepreneurs, helping them get to the next level in their businesses. And feel free to come right on up to the front, guys, if you want to snuggle in. We got some seats in here. It's like church, you know, you get here early for a good back row seat. So the two sponsors here, obviously we got the Venture Project, and secondly, we got the Oshkosh Chamber of Commerce. And I want to give a big round of applause for the Oshkosh Chamber for helping us put this together. So our guest today, really locally, absolutely a nationally renowned entrepreneur, TJ Rodgers. Now, TJ is a world-renowned entrepreneur, inventor, scientist, philanthropist, and scholar. He's the founder of Cypress Semiconductor and the former founding CEO of 34 years. TJ has dozens of awards in business and academia. He has over a dozen patents as an inventor and engineer. He has been publicly featured in various national media outlets on topics such as technology, business, and politics. As a passionate investor in local businesses, you may recognize restaurants such as TJs Harbor Bar, the Oshkosh Country Club, TJs Highland Steakhouse, and some other notable local projects which have become fan favorites in our community, spearheaded by TJ himself. Now, this short intro only scratches the surface of TJ's story and his business contributions, so hopefully today we can dig into that a little bit more. So without any further ado, it's my privilege to introduce TJ Rodgers. Well, TJ, it's good to get you here. You know, I know you got to line it up with the Packers schedule. Usually, it's kind of the way it goes with you to get you back in Wisconsin, right?
Well, I still have my house. I was born in here, so I now come back about 10 times a year, and that number is going up. Used to be 5 Packer games a year, and the crazier California gets, the more often I get back here. I need some R&R from the hyper left-wing shit that I have to deal with all the time.
This is, well, you know, I actually, before you jumped in, I pulled my Instagram. I said, hey, what questions we got? It's not often we get, you know, $1 billion entrepreneur founder into the venture project like this. What kind of questions you got? The first question I got was actually, does he also have plans to go to space, and if so, when?
Well, born here, have Midwestern values. Still look at the price on the gas pump when we put gas in the car. So no, those guys tend to be the Bezoses. They tend to have gotten hyper rich. That, you know, that means billion or plus or double-digit billion. And they live in a different world than I live in. So I'm very lucky to have been born here and to have values from this place. And it serves me really well. It makes you extremely competitive when you get to a place like that.
Yeah.
You know, they're screwing around, figuring out what logo goes on their spacesuit, right? And meanwhile, I was flying to Rochester, New York, and I found a company this is last trip, and I'm headed there tomorrow again to close the deal, where the guy sputters hard materials, oxides of transition metals on glass, solar glass. And as the light goes through it, it actually doubles the number of photons that come through it from blue light. That is, one blue light wave turns into 2 reds, and it turns out the way solar panels work, the number of photons you get is what the output is, not the color or anything. So this will revolutionize solar. Absolutely will do it. So they can work on their logo, a nice powder blue, I would hope, and I'll fly to Rochester, which, by the way, is a nice little town that is a lot like the Midwest.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about that. So let's bring us back to kind of your origin. You grew up around here, and I think that's something that's big in this local legend series that we're doing, is showing that you can start right here and carry these values and kind of this way of thinking throughout your life. Tell me where it kind of started with you.
Mercy Hospital.
Anybody else? We got something in common.
Mercy Hospital, and then turns out I worked each summer in between my freshman and sophomore year at Dartmouth. I ended up doing what was that time the new addition on Mercy Hospital. I worked on the concrete crew and the construction. I went to campus school. You probably don't know that. That was it's gone now. but it was an experimental school of WSUO. And it was extraordinary. Later in my life, I went to Dartmouth, and that's an Ivy League school, and it's highly regarded, and it is a really good school. It was really an extraordinary school. But as Dartmouth is to schools, colleges, the WSUO campus school was the grade school. It was an extraordinary school that I look back, every bit as good as Dartmouth was. Went there, went to Oshkosh High School, played football in Oshkosh High School. We had two state champions. This is when there was only one Oshkosh High School. I think you now call it West, but there was one. And I was in Keller Avenue, and we had the 65 and 66 state champion teams here in Oshkosh. That caused me to get recruited to Dartmouth. I remember I bragged. Until I was a senior in high school, I never did homework, ever. Because I worked in study hall instead of screwing off, right? So I got my homework done. I could go home and fish. I live on Lake Winnebago today. And this guy comes into the study hall, gray flannel pants, blue blazer, light blue Oxford button-down shirt, rep stripe tie. In other words, in those days, he looked like an alien, and he was wandering around looking for somebody. He saw me, he came over. "Are you TJ Rodgers?" "Yes." He said, "My name is Earl Hamilton. I'm the line coach from Dartmouth College." So the way it worked in those days, Ivy League had no money to play football, but the coach could get you in. Now today you go to jail to get your kids, and back in those days, I looked at him. Honest to God, I said, "Where is that, Dartmouth? Where is Dartmouth?" And he says, "Well, Dartmouth's an Ivy League school, and we're in Hanover, New Hampshire, and we have liberal arts." And I said, "I'm not interested." I remember these words because they were so horrible to me. Like a week later when I found out what I had done. "Well, I'm not interested in liberal arts. I'm interested in science." And he said, "Well, liberal arts includes science, and we have excellent chemistry, physics, and mathematics departments at Dartmouth." And I said, "Okay." And I thought, okay, and I'm looking down, and if the guy doesn't stop pretty fast, I'll have to take homework home tonight, which I don't want to do. Anyway, my English teacher, Gladys Vitamonis, found out that this guy had shown up. And then she climbed right on my back, and she started coming to my house, and she convinced my mother, who ran the house, that it was okay. I wouldn't go to school here or in Madison, so I could be close, better for me to go. So that was Dartmouth. Physics degree at Dartmouth. Chemistry degree at Dartmouth. Got tired of chemistry, although I love it today, and I use it all the time. Then I did physics, got tired of physics. In my senior year was Kent State, and in the spring term there was no grading, so I took a one-term course in electrical engineering, only one I ever took, and I went, "This is cool. This is what I want to do." So I called up Stanford and said to the physics department, "Thank you for accepting me, but I won't be coming. I want to be in electrical engineering. Could you please transfer me to the electrical engineering department?" I didn't understand Stanford, and all the schools were different and all that. So I'm on a payphone in the hallway in the dormitory, and the lady blows me off. She was kind of offended that, first of all, I would turn them down, and secondly, that I thought, my scholarship didn't disappear the minute I turned them down. So I ended up, I was all ready to go to drive across the country. And I ended up driving into Stanford, taking my U-Haul trailer and chaining it to one of the abutments in the parking lot, because I didn't have a job, and I took an apartment near, and I searched for a job. Then I got into electrical engineering. At that time, the hot thing was Moore's Law. Moore's Law has changed the world. And if you buy a new high-end car of any kind today, you have more transistors in that car than existed on the face of the earth when I went to Dartmouth. And that's been Moore's Law. You have the number of the value of the transistors in the car, valued at $1 each, would make your car, tens of millions of dollars in 1969 terms. Anyway, I got into Moore's Law. I was in Silicon Valley. I heard the word Silicon Valley for the first time after I got there. I was at Stanford in the Double E building, and they were all talking about starting companies, which is what you do if you're in Silicon Valley. And of course, I decided I wanted to do that, and I was there for 5 years. I got my PhD in 1975. Midwest background again. I didn't want to go start a company. There are a lot of don't want to use the word millennials as a pejorative term, but young people today that they think I'm smart, therefore I'll start a company. No, you're smart, therefore you'll start a company, lose a lot of money, and then your company will go out of business. So my first 8 years, I worked for 2 well-known Silicon Valley companies, the last of which was Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, the competitor to Intel. People know that if they know about the Intel-AMD wars, which went for 2 decades in Silicon Valley. Then I started Cypress Semiconductor, which was my company. I was mature enough to be able to run it by that time by being trained in companies, which you can't learn in business school, but by being trained in companies, how companies run. I managed to grow along with it. My job changed every year. I was CEO for 34 years. We went public 3 years after we were funded. So we were a public company for 31 years. I retired quote unquote in 2016. And now, instead of being on the board of one company, Cypress Semiconductor, I'm on the board of 6 companies. I'm an active board member / investor, hence my little trip to Rochester, New York that I'm going to do tomorrow. So I never, ever fail to think about being from here, the values here. When I'm in business and I'm dealing with some PhD, super smart airhead. And the guy, let's talk for a minute. Let's try to do like a sentence, short, declarative, subject, verb, object, period, and talk back and forth. It's been an advantage, and now that I'm semi-retired, I still work every day and every Saturday and Sunday morning, except when I come to Green Bay games. That value, which is Midwest, really, is really paid for me.
Tell me a little bit about. So I want to go to the transition. I think it was something that a lot of entrepreneurs or people that are entrepreneurial minded go through with this Midwest kind of style, as you described, where the smart people go get jobs and work, but then comes this transition where it's ready to take a leap. In your opinion, what does that look like? When is it the right time to be an entrepreneur or to work for somebody, or what does that look like?
I think you really know. But by the way, being an entrepreneur is not necessarily a happy, stressless, wonderful, right? You get a lot of toys, you get a lot of money, but you're not necessarily happy. I kind of like work, so it's okay because I enjoyed myself while I made a lot of money. But if you want a nice job, a balanced life, a family, you want to not be late for your sons and daughters' birthdays, and you don't have any particular. I don't have a lot of material desires. I've never lived the big lavish life ever, even in California. You don't need any of that stuff. Then you don't want that unless you want to be an entrepreneur on a small scale. Like you can run a small company which employs most of America's people, and you got a place that's a shop somewhere, or it's a small factory somewhere. That's great. You can do that, and you can scale to that level and still have a somewhat normal life. But you don't want to run a public company if that becomes your family. Period. Not necessarily family, but your life. That's what you do, and then you look forward to family time as kind of like almost like a vacation or a day off that you really kind of look forward to.
How have you managed that kind of throughout your career? Is this more of like a father-son moment right here?
No, well, you always set me up for a great smart-ass answer. The answer is you get divorced. So my wife was from Oshkosh, and we went to California, and we were together. My first wife till 1985, and she didn't like the rat race a lot. And I was just becoming, the man. You have your own company, and you can see your company's going to score, and your company's going to be known nationally. You're trading on NASDAQ. And then she said, quote, I'm going to the Midwest to have children. Would you like to come with me? So that's how I fixed. That problem actually got fixed for me. And then I met somebody at work and married her. She's here. She's wearing see that black shirt there? That's a black Stuart Tartan shirt. My favorite tartan in the world. And she was a random access memory designer, so we could talk shop and be home. She likes tubes, she likes travel, and you end up with a soulmate. That's what happened to me.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit. This is something we were talking about a little bit in my office. We have a Vince Lombardi quote, and it talks about winning. And you being a former athlete, and you're nose tackle at Dartmouth, and anybody that knows the position of nose tackle, I don't think there's a better entrepreneurial position probably out there, right? Where it's just your goal is to get the quarterback at any cost right now from here A to B. And tell me how that's impacted your life, the world of sports, and what winning kind of meant to you.
When I was 11, Green Bay had just finished the 1958 season. They were 110-1. And they were writing about, and I read the Northwestern every day, writing about getting a new coach. And they got this kind of headstrong, hard-ass guy from New York. He was the offensive coordinator for the New York Giants, Vince Lombardi. And he insisted coming to the small town and having not only the head coaching job, but also the general manager's job. He was the man. He ran the whole show. In those days, football was a lot more scaled down, a lot more about football and less about business than it is today. But he was the guy who came in. And I remember I was watching black and white TV in the same living room I sit in today in the house. And I was watching this guy named Jimmy Taylor, who was their fullback, and Paul Hornung. And it was exciting. That was when I got into football. Of course, that was Lombardi's first year. He won his first game. He beat the Chicago Bears. They carried him off the field. Then they lost 3 in a row. And so a little bit like this year, but kind of backwards. And Lombardi's Lombardi. But then as a high school student, I listened to what the man said. He's a lot more than a coach. He is a pretty deep philosopher. He had a lot of substance to him. Now, this particular quote was about winning, and he was about that, and people mistake that quote. I use that quote all the time. I give a talk on business, and I give a talk about the story of Cypress Semiconductor called 0 to a Billion. So the first $1 billion of revenue in Cypress, starting from one guy, me in my kitchen, writing a business plan. And I have about a dozen Lombardi quotes in them. They're spectacular, even today. And you can go to a meeting of young entrepreneurs today and have that slide. Sometimes I use it and I talk directly about it. Sometimes I just keep it in the appendix, and it's A.1 in the appendix. I can get to it like that. So somebody will make a comment that Vince Lombardi had figured out in 1959 or 60. And I flipped to A.1 and I show the quote. And after I got back to A.1 about the 4th time they get it, somehow this old guy who's just, quote unquote, just football coach had it together. So yeah, he's I'm an electronics guy. I can help you out if you'd like.
On, off, right now. One thing that I noticed about Cypress was one of the core values. In fact, your number one value was about winning. And this is really pulled through, I think, into a lot of your business practice, this idea of winning and growing.
Yeah. So let me, before I got to do a little background in core values. So when you come from here, you have core values, especially when you go to a place that your core values are different. You kind of notice that you think differently about stuff. Your first take on something is different. So that goes in your mind. Then there were 2 professors at Stanford, Jerry Porras and Jim Collins. And they wrote a book called Built to Last. It was, I think, 1986, Stanford Business School. And it became the #1 best-selling business book, and I read it. And the theme of the book was, okay, Moore's Law today, optics tomorrow, automated manufacturing, whatever. Those are the things businesses work on. Then you can talk about the titans of Wall Street, and this Jack Welch is, neutron Jack Welch. He cuts costs fast. That's why they called him Neutron Jack, because he nuked money-losing divisions at General Electric, et cetera. And it's kind of a crazy quote. And you ask yourself, where does it get put together? Where do you have a overlying philosophy? and that was core values. So they wrote a book on core values. The synopsis is, okay, one more little point, because this is a really good book I'd recommend you read because it's still a classic. They also, they started out their study, it was like a 10-year study at Stanford Biz, and they sent out a postcard to every CEO on NASDAQ. And on the postcard it said, name 3 visionary companies. Now that sounds like sort of a haphazard survey, but it wasn't. First of all, if it had more than a postcard and more than 10 seconds worth of work, every CEO would throw it away. It turns out they had 35% response, which is astronomical. And they used the word visionary. It's a little bit vague, but the point is, if you think about a company as visionary, then you would think about Ford in 1910, that kind of stuff. Boeing when 707 was invented. So they write down 3 visionary companies. Then they took them back and they created this big database of visionary companies. Then they went and they sorted out every company that wasn't 50 years old. The argument being, a lot of hot companies get a lot of press, and then they blow up and they embarrass the guy. For example, there was a book, Jim Peters and Waters. It was McKinsey Consultants, and that was a hot book in the 70s. And most of those, there actually was a book written later showing that most of those companies exploded. So they picked companies that only had 50 years of success, meaning they had a chance to go through a trough, have a failure, come back, go down again, and after 50 years they were still there. So they had staying power. And then they picked, then the other thing they did, which was amazing, as opposed to just picking a company that's hot today. And you can think of a lot of hot companies that over various times in your life, and you look back and they're not hot anymore. They maybe don't even exist. They picked several companies, and they picked the best and the second best company. And then they compared the best and second best company. So when they made a comparison, the best company does A, B, and C. It just does what it does. It does things even better on these things than the second best company in that area. So by that, they made the comparison tough. Anyway, they wrote about 13 visionary companies. And what they discovered was that all of those companies had core values. And by core values, I mean exactly what you'd mean in English. We were talking about Midwestern values before, exactly that kind of thing. And those core values are what drove the company. The second finding was the core values were very strong and very deeply held among the company. They weren't the CEO getting up blathering crap about, the newest project or whatever. These were deeply held core values. And they were also very different. So amazingly enough, some companies that were thought to be tough in the real world weren't so tough in their core values. They were nurturing companies. Flip side, you take Nordstrom. You guys know Nordstrom here? Okay, well, Nordstrom won in the retailing division of this book. And Nordstrom, it turns out, runs absolute Marine Corps boot camp. So by the time those sales associates get into a Nordstrom store, they've been through hell, and they're quite good. So all the companies are different. The point was they had core values, they believed in them, they aligned with what they needed to get done, and they truly practiced them. So turns out I knew these guys before because I went to Stanford, and I had already hired them. And they said, you guys have very strong core values, which we did. Hard work. The winning core value, getting back to the question, is about you work insane in Silicon Valley. Not hard, insane. And it's like at 8 o'clock you think I should go home now. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And then if you're showing the flag, that is, you don't drift in at 9:30 like the average computer hacker drifts in at 9:30. You show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then all of a sudden you're working on sleep deprivation, which I did all of my career. So that's how you work. So when you say you work hard, you work hard. And there are people, if you're passionate about what you do, what else did you watch TV? What am I going to do if I am in Silicon Valley during the Moore's Law, during the period, this is true statement, during the beginning of a period when the price of a transistor goes from $1 to 1/billionth of a dollar. That is, you can buy many chips today where you get 1 billion transistors for $1. And that required layer after layer after layer of technology. Transistors, and that's my actual technical dissertation, was on transistor physics. Chemistry is how you make transistors. I had that. Physics is how you explain them. I had that at Dartmouth. And then I took that electrical engineering course and totally changed what I did, except they came back, and both of those disciplines were core to what I did in Silicon Valley. So that's what you do. And when you have that, winning matters. There's nothing. Think about football. Imagine practicing your rear end off, say, in Lombardi days, and then having a 112-1 record. No, it's 110-1. It was Lyle Blackburn in 1958. So nothing more discouraging than work your ass off and lose. So these people want to win. And it turns out they're all shareholders, so everybody has a piece of the action, significant piece of the action. So in Silicon Valley, well known, if you're a secretary and you work in a company that wins, there's your house right there. And houses there cost about 6 times what they cost here, square foot for square foot. Doesn't matter. If you were in the right company, you won, you did that. So it was a lot like an athletic competition. People thought that way. And that was what you talked about in the hallways. You didn't talk about politics or whatever else. You talked about intel. You talked about what are we going to do. We talked about IDT, Integrated Device Technologies, just brought out a static RAM with an access time of 25 nanoseconds. Holy shit, what are we going to do about that? So that's what it was like. It was literally like being in an athletic contest, which then boils back to being on a team.
So that's kind of interesting. I think that you've kind of engaged the culture of not only the region, but the work culture, and you've rallied a vision around that, which is revolving around winning. It's like, we're not here to work hard for nothing. We're here for a purpose, for a reason. How did you get them to get that buy-in? Like, what did you do to rally them around this idea of winning?
Well, first of all, you show the flag. I don't think you can be a CEO and play golf visibly when other people are working. First of all, why are you CEO if that's your value? So you show the flag. Sometimes it's overt. For example, at Intel, everybody knows Intel. When I went to Silicon Valley, Intel was 3 years old, and I knew all the founders of Intel: Gordon Moore, Andy Grove, and Robert Noyce. Noyce and Moore were both PhDs in transistor physics, exactly what I did, and I interviewed with both of them, and I turned down 2 job offers at Intel because I didn't want a nice, comfortable job inside of Intel. I wanted to kick Intel's ass and start a company. Nobody kicked Intel's ass. I mean, Intel's a $50 billion company right now, worth about $300 billion. And even that doesn't matter as much as the fact that Intel's inside for every one of you everywhere in the world. That's how you think when you're there. So, circling on back to the winning thing, that's what everybody thought about. Gordon Moore thought about that. I've talked to him a dozen times in my life. And the last time we talked, we had an argument about silicon dioxide. And his point was, as it gets thinner, it gets more fragile, and soon it doesn't work and it's not reliable. So-called hot electron injection. And I pointed out that I had made a transistor that fixed that with architecture. That is, that problem couldn't happen, and we argued about that. That's what people there talk about. And I can believe in Detroit. During the heyday of Detroit, it was cars. There are different centers of excellence. It's not just technology.
If you can bring back to the foundation of Cypress and exactly where you found your differentiation for the product that you invented, the semiconductor, and during that time, and kind of what was your thought process and how you were going to solve this problem when you were going back in that transition as becoming an entrepreneur?
So you're competing against really smart people who really work their ass off. So these it's like going to Green Bay if you're another team. Like, the Steelers are a good team, but they had to go to Lambeau yesterday. That's a hard job, and they didn't make it yesterday. So that's your environment. It's like playing an away game. So what did we do technically? Well, first of all, first thing I did was fail, giant crash. I invented that transistor I just talked about, did successfully solve the problem I talked about. Moore's company was Intel, and Moore was working on things, and it became known as Moore's Law. None of you have ever heard about VMOS. That was my technology, and my technology solved that one problem. His technology, what he did was make transistors smaller and smaller. As they got smaller, if you made them twice as small, they got 4 times better in power speed, meaning they could be 4 times as fast at the same power, or just as fast with 4 times less power, 2 times on each. And then he did that 8 generations. And meanwhile, my technology was kind of a trick to solve a critical problem that needed to be solved. And the Moore's Law juggernaut rolled over us. I worked, my first job was American Microsystems. I worked there for 5 years and 17 days. You remember numbers like that when you work like I did there. And I got killed. And my whole group got laid off. I recommended the company they stop pursuing the technology because clear Moore's Law was going to win to me at that time. I went back to AMI, the building I was in. Okay, Santa Clara Valley, Silicon Valley is the Santa Clara Valley. And it was known for fruit orchards before Silicon Valley happened. Silicon Valley happened to Stanford. And actually the building I was in, Professor Terman was the first guy to rent out some Stanford land to 2 guys called Hewlett and Packard in 1939 to build a company, which became also pretty famous on the Stanford campus. And in that, I lost my train of thought. Okay, and I'm having a...
We were talking about the semiconductor technology that you developed. You first failed with American Microsystems.
Yeah. Thank you. So after blowing up at American Microsystems, I then started a second company, and the name of the game is you got to be good enough. Nobody's going to buy your stuff if it's not better. Mm-hmm. You got to be good enough, but if you try to be too much different, you're off the main. It's, for example, like a guy deciding that steam cars are going to make it because they're lower polluting, whatever. Not going to happen. So we started out, and our deal was simple. Moore's Law made things faster. And there's 2 kinds of... Well, at that time, there were 2 kinds of transistors, MOS, metal oxide silicon, and then CMOS, complementary metal oxide silicon. They were slightly different, but one was harder to make, CMOS. It's what makes watches, super low power. You can run off a tiny battery for a year. MOS is faster, makes like computer chips. And that's what Intel made. And my idea was to take this technology and goose it with Moore's Law and make it fast and low power both. And that's what we did. And there are only 3 companies in the world that did it, Hitachi, IDT, and us. That's how we got public. That's how we took off. And Intel was actually, for a while, 2 years behind us. We were shipping fast CMOS, and Intel was still shipping NMOS. Robert Noyce gave a speech about NMOS was it. I was in the audience. NMOS was it. And that's making it smaller is all that's going to happen. I'm sitting there, and I've got CMOS, scale CMOS working in my company. I'm thinking, we'll see, Robert. We'll see. And today, CMOS is it. That technology was the step forward. So I actually got crushed by the Moore's Law. And then I created a derivative of Moore's Law, and I actually got 2 years ahead of Intel for a while. But Intel was huge, had a lot of customers, a lot of big factories. So it's like building 10 cars in your garage and being better than whatever General Motors makes, and you'll be ahead of them for a while. And then they change over the model, and then all of a sudden, all over the United States, those cars show up. And that's what happened with Intel. We still made it. We were a $2 billion company the year I retired. $2 billion in revenue.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a good message for a lot of the people that are entrepreneurs and startups in this community here, is you don't have to do something radically different necessarily, but you could look at kind of these micro differentiators of building the better mousetrap in a lot of ways, for the proverbial saying, right? And I think that's in some sense what you kind of did was you were able to take something that was working, the Moore's Law strategy, and you were able to build it better with your strategy for the first couple of years. It bought you some time.
And hire guys out of Intel, because they all know, right? They want to win. They're working hard. And you go, okay, you can keep working on that stuff. You and I both know that stuff will not be where it's at in a year or even 2 years. It's over. And they go, yep. He said, now you need to come across. You get a great salary at Intel. Yep. Do you have a lot of stock? Nope. You want a lot of stock? Because stock goes, in this case, your stock goes from $1 to 50. If you have 20, 30,000 shares of stock, change your life.
Right.
And you offer them stock. It's a risk, right? A lot of times you get offered stock, doesn't happen. But in Silicon Valley, they'll take the risk. And they come over, and then all of a sudden you've got the team. So they are going back to your earlier question about working. You didn't. That's not the way it works. You didn't have to say, we have to work very hard here. Andy Grove, who ran Intel, programmed the lights at Intel to turn off at 7 o'clock at night. So they had relays all over, and at 7 o'clock at night, clunk, 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 he went to emergency lighting. That was the message. You stayed long enough. We don't want you working any harder. We don't want you burning yourself out. 7 o'clock is late enough to work. Go home now. So you don't, in that environment, you don't drive. It's like a coach has got a great team, and the team drives itself, and the coach gets to coach. Like if you look at LaFleur and then the Packers, he's not a driver. He's an architect. He has strategy. He's a strategist, and he creates an environment, and those guys win or lose. And then that's what it's like in a Silicon Valley technology company.
Wow. I think something that I wanted to get your opinion about, because I know you're involved with a lot of kind of future-looking businesses, more speculative investments and strategies like that. For people interested in getting into an entrepreneurial space, what is some of the emerging technology or emerging markets that you think we need people to be investigating, researching, and becoming entrepreneurs in these types of industries?
That's an extremely hard question, and even as a technical person who remains technical in multiple areas, you can't answer the question because it's so random and so difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, and everything about pool, right? I'm talking billiards. It's a fact that every time you shoot the white ball, there is one possibility where it could hit 8 other balls, they could hit other balls, they could hit other balls, and the table would clean out. And it never happens. And that's because when the third ball hits the fourth ball, there's no way of really predicting. It's a chaos theory that they talked about in Jurassic Park. It really exists. It was called the three-body problem, where Isaac Newton solved the problem for planets circling around the sun, asteroids in a path around the sun, and he was unable to solve the three-body problem. And that's the three-body problem where it is an unsolvable problem. So I have no way of telling you what's going to happen, and I could be surprised tomorrow. And I've been surprised pretty much by every turn in technology. I can tell you some things we need, and if you have a good idea in those areas, you're likely to be in a good position. Without giving a political statement, either we're going to burn less oil because we choose to burn less oil, or we're going to stop burning oil when we run out of oil and gas. And pretty much everybody now, there's a huge market for people who want renewables. So if you're anywhere in the food chain of renewables, you're in the right spot. That's going to get bigger. It's going to get a lot bigger. And it includes not only renewable energy like solar power, wind power. It includes things that work well with renewable energy, electric cars. Right now, electric cars are 2%-ish of the cars in the United States. And that will change dramatically. So if you think about what's in an electric car, you got motors, so things that have been out of vogue for 100 years. High efficiency motors are a big deal. You have to have headlights, right? So lights that produce a lot of light with a small amount of energy, they are a big deal. They have been light emitting diodes and their cousins. So anything in that area, as a matter of fact, I told you my story about my glass company. My other company is Enphase, makes inverters. Those are things that take the DC power coming out of a panel and turn it into AC power 240 that goes into your house and will run your house and will sync up with the grid so that a single solar panel can actually add power to the grid by itself on your roof with nobody's help and no control and no utility in the way. I have another company that makes trackers. sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So if you make a teeter-totter that's a half a mile long and you put your solar panels on it, then if you tilt them toward the rising sun and then track the rising sun all day long, let them flat at noon, and then watch sunset at night, you get 30% more energy from a panel. Mm. So I work on a company, the name of the game there is it takes 50 tons of steel to hold up 1 megawatt's worth of panels. And the first company that can make the number 20 tons of steel for 1 megawatt of panels will kick ass. So, of course, we got guys in Austin working on that problem. That's an area where I can say for sure. Other ones, especially in the computer area, I use computers. They're not my fun. I use the computer as a tool to do my real work. So computers and software, that's another big deal. Automated manufacturing will be another big deal. We're running out of people, right? I come to Oshkosh, and every place I go, they can't hire enough people. Well, that's systematic. It's not something that just happened because of COVID-19. It's a little bit aggravated by COVID-19, but in the future, we're going to have fewer people that do work. Okay, well, therefore, robots have to do work for us, which is good, right? The idea of robots replacing a job is goodness for people, not badness. Any job a machine can do that's repetitive, you don't want a human doing. It's a mind-killing job anyway. So anything in that realm will be something I'd look at for investment. And then I'll leave it there. I've always liked quantum mechanics all my life. Well, us in Dartmouth anyway. And there's some things in that area, but the ones I told you are places if you find, and by the way, don't bet on one company, bet on 2 or 3. It's like I told you the story about the book where they compared the top 2 companies. You don't know which one's going to be best. The president of those 3 companies doesn't know which one's going to be best because all 3 will say we're the best, and only one of the 3 can be right.
That's, I think, so we had kind of 2 industries. Number 1, you had renewable energy. Number 2, you had kind of automated manufacturing, if you will, or automated redundancy jobs. You could think that could pull into real estate, painting, things like that. What have you got going on locally here, as far as kind of some things you're growing? Obviously, we're familiar, obviously, with TJs Harbor Bar, the Steakhouse, the Country Club, some of these other things we got going on here. What are some other things you've been doing to invest into the community, around Oshkosh?
Well, tomorrow I meet with the Oshkosh City Council. People come to me, right, and they hear the story you just told, and they come up and say, "Hi, how are you?" Let me tell you, and then we go on, and it turns out I kind of like that. This glass guy found 5'6" Indian PhD from MIT, IQ, very high 3 digits. And he wrote me an email on my website, which that's the website, the email of death where it goes in and gets eaten up by the computer. And I read that stuff and I look at it and I go, okay. And he was getting shafted by a venture, which that's sort of a tautology, shafted by an East Coast venture capitalist. They ought to have that as part of the title. and by the way, that's why Silicon Valley works. That's why I told you. The idea is not to become a billionaire and everybody else in your company not make money. The idea is to broadly spread out the stock to every person in the company. Then your company is a team that works together to make something happen. Then if you're working on something visionary that you really like, then that's better. And then that creates the environment I talked about. Winning is what everybody's after. Off track again.
We were talking about the local kind of investments and some other things you're doing locally. You're meeting with the city hall.
So tomorrow I meet with the city council, or at least with the head of the city council, and Oshkosh's got a homeless problem. Mm-hmm. I thought that was in California. I've seen it. It happens here. So we're going to build, assuming we get permission, and in California, for the planning commission to give up its right to make sure everything is expensive and awkward as possible, they would literally watch somebody die in the street of hypothermia. These are bad human beings, okay? So if that doesn't happen here, we're going to build, it's called a tiny house village. We're going to build 30 houses. Easy. Hard part is getting people to accept help, not doing it. I was still CEO of Cypress when San Jose, California. First year, all the left-wing stuff, you're a hard ass, you talk about Vince Lombardi, you work hard, and then you get the reprisal from the other side, that's not really right. Our mayor was that way, his name is Liccardo. So one day I read in the San Jose Mercury News, there's a village of houses, and it's under a freeway, and it's fairly big, and it's got a few hundred inhabitants. Okay, those are people trying to make out, and of course in San Jose, where a dump, a scraper, is $600,000, and $1 million house needs a lot of work on a small lot. There obviously are a lot of homeless people because there are a lot of people can't afford anything close to that. Newspaper article about how smart they are. So they're normal people, engineers, stuff like that. Maybe they got some problems too. But they've engineered their houses, built them out of scrap material. Over time, they got this village. And the dumb bastards in San Jose, California, took bulldozers and knocked down their village. You see, it was a sanitary problem. And you can go in, you can think about all the atrocities committed in the name of public health. And this was one of them. And they bulldozed it. And they didn't even, like, a person might have a bicycle, might have a tent that they finally could buy or was given. And they bulldozed it, and they ran a garbage truck behind it and threw all the stuff away. So I asked him to come to my office. I had been a supporter of his. And it just went apeshit. And how can you do this? I said, you guys talk about the hard ass. And I said, on the worst day in my life, I wouldn't take a man's property from him, especially the poorest and the most needy. So he's, shucking and jiving and telling me it's hard, he's got to deal with this and that. And I'm going, no, there's no excuse for any of this shit. So I said, I knew there was a homeless problem. So I said, how about if I build you some houses? And he said, how many? I said, 100. And they'll be small, and they'll be perfect, and they'll be pretty, and they'll be efficient, and they'll be solar powered, and they'll have Wi-Fi, and they'll have communications, and they'll be warm and comfortable. And you just find, you get the planning department off my ass so I can build them. Because right now in San Jose, this is not a hyperbole. If I bought a birdhouse in a 1 acre lot, and I put the birdhouse in the middle of the 1 acre lot and said, I want to give that a street number, you're talking $50,000. Mm. You got all these commissions, right? And then they help you, quote unquote, help you. And then you got to pay them and their staff and their staff. So I said, you get the planning commission off my ass so I can build something that's structurally sound, and I'll build these houses. And I said, give me a piece of land, I don't care. And they will show up and they'll be great. And he said, well, what if I need 200 houses? I said, look, we get this thing started, I'll call up my buddies. You'll have 200 houses in a day. Don't worry about it. The next day, his assistant called me up and said, the mayor was wondering, this was a $10 million project. The mayor was wondering if you would mind using the $10 million to buy land. And I said, maybe I didn't communicate well when I described how I would build the houses, how they would be electronic, how they would be solar powered, how they wouldn't even be hooked up to the grid, etc. Maybe you didn't hear all that, although I think I saw you in the room in my office. No, I am not giving $10 million in some political slush fund. I'll build you 100 houses. Do you want them or not? Click. Never heard from him again. And meanwhile, in San Jose, in California, they passed $1 billion bill to house the poor. Nothing happened. And I read this last summer. They finally got 2 houses, a pilot project, and they put them in a parking lot in downtown San Jose. So I have no trouble building the houses. It'll be a good project. They'll be built in Wisconsin. They'll have Solaria panels and Enphase inverters on them, and then that kind of stuff. I'll have a talk with my friends in California. Question is, do you want them or not? We'll see tomorrow.
Yeah. How can we support as a community?
That's really a very good question, because you would think the story I just told would cause outrage, and whoever pulled that off would no longer be around as mayor. He's still there, been 6, 8, 10 years. So the answer is the people you elect, and the problem is, the real truth is, he actively reflects their views. They cry for 14 seconds when they're watching the 7 o'clock news. Then they go on and they enjoy the benefits that they've got, and don't worry about the guys on the other side of the chain link fence that they put up to keep them out. So if you just shouldn't put up with it, and politicians will get it. You stand outside their place with a sign that's derogatory, they'll get it. Now, again, I don't think you have to do that kind of stuff here, because the guy I talked to is Mark Roloff, I think.
Yeah.
He's a normal human being. Like, I talked to him, we exchanged data. He asked me some questions. It was like he's a real person. That's not the people I'm used to dealing with.
I think, El, we got time. What's our time? We got time for a couple questions from the audience here. Do we have a mic we can get people? We did have a couple questions. I think if any of you guys heard something that was interesting, you wanted to dig in on a little bit. If we just ask you, you come up here and grab the mic and ask the question for TJ, and then we'll begin wrapping this thing up. So we have any questions out there? Anyone want to kick this thing off?
How about the Pioneer Inn property?
Yeah, why don't you ask that in the mic, because we can get on there.
Thoughts on what should happen at the Pioneer Inn?
Pioneer Inn. I've been on that property 3 times. I was on it before the old structure got scraped. Never spent time there as a kid, although it was the big place to go when I was a kid, because my house was on a lake. I had a dock. I could fish off my dock, swim off my dock, so I didn't have to go to the Pioneer. I tried a couple times to do a deal, never could get a deal done. The story I just told, it's not about building the house that's easy. It's getting people to find a way to make it happen if they want to make it happen. If they don't want to make it happen, then there'll be all kinds of confusing excuses, and you think you're arguing on the main point, and you're arguing on some little, going down a rat hole, as we say. So I never could get to a coherent deal. I had bought 50 acres south of Oshkosh. Calbus, it's got a nice little harbor there, and it's an RV park, and we're working on that right now. And that one's going to be a nice project. In general, got all this money that comes from high tech, and you can put it back into things that last. So that will be something that will last, and it'll be enjoyable by the average person, not just a rich guy. And then this morning...
Any more details on that you want to share, or is that not public yet?
Do we have details?
No? Okay. Your PR over here, Wing,
no,
is saying...
No, my venture company, all the stuff I'm talking about is my venture company. My venture company has 2 employees. The CFO is right there. She works in the study. And the CEO, me, I sit in the kitchen. So that's one of the reasons I know all the details about all these things. So she's working on this project. But that's a project we were going to do. Well, this morning, I just walked over from the Oshkosh Northwestern building. You know, that old beautiful building?
Yeah, right here.
I'm not going to rename it the Rodgers building, but I own it now, and I'm going to try. I'm going to come up something cool there. So those are going to be my next 2 projects.
Hey.
Great news. So who was your favorite teacher at Oshkosh High? And did you blow up the chemistry lab?
Did I blow up, in reverse order, did I blow up the chemistry lab at Oshkosh High School? Yes. I sneaked into the chemistry lab during lunch hour, and I was making a flare to celebrate my girlfriend's birthday, which was March 18th. I already told you the girlfriend story. And so I was making a flare, and of course, if you're good enough, when you're good at chemistry and you're very inexperienced, you're always good enough to do some real damage, not just, have something doesn't work.
Right.
All right, so gunpowder is carbon powder, sulfur, and potassium nitrate, saltpeter. So I figured I'd make gunpowder better. So I used potassium perchlorate, which is a much stronger oxidizer than potassium nitrate, and I used sulfur. And then I replaced the carbon with magnesium metal powder. So magnesium metal, if you remember the old-fashioned flash bulbs that have the filament, right? Magnesium is a highly flammable metal, and it burns white hot. That's why you get that flash. So I used magnesium metal powder along with one of the world's best oxidizers, and I was stirring it in the chemistry laboratory. And I set down the stirring rod. Somebody was coming in, and I was not supposed to be in there. And I set it down, and then nobody came in. Then when I picked it up, I picked up the other end. And the sweaty end from my finger went in. And when it went in, I heard it just a little like that. And then, whoom. And it went off, and it burned a 6-foot hole in the ceiling. About this, it burned a 6-foot hole in the ceiling. All the test papers for chemistry were on. I was on the front bench in the lecturing hall. All the test papers got burned. A spark shot over in the corner, burned the American flag down. It was February, and they evacuated. Oh, and then the smoke was the dark black smoke, and they evacuated the building. So it was a shitstorm with a major.
The stories are true then. Yeah. We got any other questions out there in the audience we'd like to discuss? Yeah.
By the way, just so you know, then I went to Stanford, and I ran an epitaxial reactor at Stanford, which is a reactor that runs red hot in an ambient of pure hydrogen with a pyrophoric gas called silane. Pyrophoric means that it explodes on contact with air. And I also had a little accident in the Stanford laboratory as well.
So you mentioned renewables, and obviously we're going there. And a lot of people talk about how you use more carbon to produce the energy with renewables, and what are we going to do with all the lithium when these batteries go bad and things like that. So what's your take on that?
Okay. Your comment's got a bunch of parts. The first part, that in terms of carbon, renewables don't pay for themselves. It's just, well, first of all, it depends upon what you're talking about. For example, if you're talking about an electric vehicle versus a gas-powered vehicle, it turns out a lot of the benefit of electric vehicles is given back because the life cycle, making, mining the vehicle. Electric vehicles are still significantly better than internal combustion vehicles. And I'm not a zealot on that. I live in Silicon Valley, and we're very green. And I drive a V12 Mercedes. That's my car. On solar panels, it's not true, and it's very wrong, and I've heard that stuff for years. There's two kinds of payback on a panel, three kinds, really. One is I buy it, it starts making electricity, and when does the kilowatt hours times cents per kilowatt hour pay back for the panel? Okay, and that number is about, in today's world, it's about 5 years. And panels really, really do last 20, 25 years. So, that after you paid back, you're getting free power for a long time. Second payback is energy payback, and that is, so I have to manufacture, I have to have machines, the factory has an electrical hookup, so I burn electrical power and other forms of energy to make a panel. How long before the panel puts out enough kilowatt hours to pay that back? And it turns out that's sub 1 year. And the third thing is carbon dioxide, and that's sub 1 year as well. So solar panels absolutely are clean energy, and they really do have a payback. Their negative thing, of course, is they only work 5 hours a day. Then it gets to what you said, which you have to have batteries. I forgot when I was listing my companies before. Is the Novix, which is a battery company, lithium-ion battery company. And it is heavy manufacturing, and it does involve mining. But even then, you're better off having a solar system twice as big as you need and capturing half the energy during the day and running your house at night and flipping the switch off to a utility. You're better off in ecological terms. Lithium-ion batteries do have to improve. I've tried to invest, and it was one of those deals where you're off down a rabbit hole. But there is a company being formed in Nevada right now that will recycle lithium-ion batteries. And by that, I mean you'll take the battery pack from a Tesla car, throw it in a shredder, and out the other end will come copper, aluminum, lithium, cobalt oxide, manganese oxide, and lithium hydroxide as nearly pure powder's ready to go. So there will be a recycling capture, because you're right, there's giant stockyards full of that stuff piling up right now. But it turns out it's the most valuable junk in the world. And if you have the technology to recycle that stuff, the gross margin on that plant, meaning the price you get for selling the stuff minus what you have to pay for the stuff coming in, is like over 70%. It's better than gold mining. So very shortly, and I mean this year it's already happening, and over the next few years there will be local lithium-ion battery recycling plants and electronic plants in general all over the U.S. That problem is solved. It just hasn't hit the main line yet.
Any other last questions in the audience?
And by the way, the other thing is, I'm not convinced that lithium-ion, for my lifetime, lithium-ion batteries will be the way you store energy. Mm-hmm. But in the future, and it's still, I'm associated in investing in 2 fuel cell companies. So fuel cell, short form, you take a piece of plastic, you put a little bit of platinum on it, platinum and iridium, you put hydrogen on one side, and you put air on the other side. The hydrogen will permeate the plastic. It will form water. And then the electron that the hydrogen left behind will go out and be like a battery. So it's like a battery where there's a continuous flow of fuel into the battery. And fuel cells I was on the board of a fuel cell company called Bloom Energy for 12 years. And their fuel cell is this, it looks like if you take a pickup truck and take 1/3 of the back end of the pickup truck, that is 3 units on the back. That's how big their fuel cell is, and it produces 300,000 watts of power continuously. So fuel cells are not wimpy little things. They can be big. They're too expensive right now. And when they come along, people will use fuel cells that don't use methane, natural gas. They'll use hydrogen. That's not a panacea, because that hydrogen can be dirty crap itself. Because 95% of hydrogen today is made by using methane and releasing all the carbon dioxide you would have released in order to burn the methane, but just taking the hydrogen in a chemical reaction and releasing the carbon dioxide anyway. But the price of solar energy is now so low. What do you guys pay for a kilowatt hour?
Keith?
12 cents. All right, so that's a little bit better. 12 cents, the national average is 14 cents. Today, when they build giant solar plants, and these are things that cover square miles, nobody would build them unless there were already tenants. So it's like you'd never build a hotel that you didn't have a hotel company going to buy it and take care of getting it occupied as quickly as possible. That's the way utilities work on solar cells. So they're going to build this big, and it's actually a 5-stage chain. It's very complex the way it's financed. But at the end of the day, there's a thing called a PPA, Power Purchase Agreement. And until that's signed, that is until you have customers willing to take 120% of the output of the plant, everything, and a few of them can still drop out, in other words, the plant doesn't start. Okay, today the price for PPAs is about 3 cents a kilowatt hour versus your 12. So right now, solar has gotten so cheap that the cheapest form of electricity on the face of the earth is a solar kilowatt hour. Now, what's missing in my story on hydrogen is if you run that through a thing called an electrolyzer. Chemistry, did you ever see it? The guy takes a beaker in high school, he puts in 2 rods, he hooks it up to a battery, and little bubbles start coming off the rods. Anybody ever see that little experiment? That's called electrolysis. And by running electricity through water, you break it into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen you throw back, and the hydrogen you keep. Now, it turns out if you make one the size of this room, and you run the equivalent power of a power plant through it, you can make tons of hydrogen. And if you make it with solar electrolysis, electricity, this bad news is you only get to run your plant 5 hours a day on average, right? But the good news is it's really cheap stuff. So that's called green hydrogen. It's quite a ways out in the future. There's a huge amount of hype going today talking about gray and blue hydrogen. Those are all the petrochemical industry trying to play into the hydrogen hype that's going on today. Eventually, the point I'm making is energy will be stored in the form of hydrogen, and it'll be stored locally. The big utilities, they're as long in the tooth as Thomas Edison himself is. It's time for that to end. So in one vision I have, on the back of a panel, you'll get DC current from the panel. You'll have an inverter that puts it into your grid of your house. You'll also have a small solid-state fuel cell. And during the day, when you're making more electricity than you can use, you'll be creating hydrogen, and it'll be stored in a tube. And I'm talking a tube that's this big. Think about a propane torch. Only a high-tech tube full of particles of magnesium, that my favorite metal from my other story. And, the magnesium giveth and magnesium taketh away, in the biblical sense. It'll be stored in magnesium, and then it'll come out at night. So you'll have a solar panel that'll, in effect, stay on at night. That's one of my theoretical dreams. I'm studying about that now. I still do physics problems on Saturday and Sunday morning.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. And the internet's so great because I can pull down, I don't have to go to the library, I can pull down stuff and I can read about it. So in the future, the storage, I think, will be fuel cells and hydrogen, not lithium-ion batteries. For the next 20 plus years, it's going to be those batteries. And then really can have a chance to go renewable. And if we go renewable solar, it really can happen.
Go ahead.
Is that the answer to climate change? Renewable solar?
Is solar the answer to climate change? Wow.
That's a big one.
Well, there's a guy you ought to read. His name is Bjorn Lomborg. He's a Danish scientist, and he's very polite and very diplomatic. So when he says most of the climate change stuff you hear is horseshit, he says it in such a way it doesn't even have that kind of offensive ring to it, what I just said. I became convinced that there is climate change, i.e. the Earth is getting warmer 2 years ago when I was looking out the picture window at my house on Lake Winnebago. What did I see? Huh? Well, okay, I saw water in January. That's a little clue in itself. I'll give you that one. I'm talking. No, what I saw was a pelican. I never saw a pelican for 18 years. I didn't see one. They don't come up here, right? Because they freeze to death. And I saw for the last 3 years now, I've seen pelicans. So the band of life for pelicans has moved a little bit north. Okay, well, for them, it's good, right? They got more habitat. They've got Lake Winnebago. It's full of fish. That's what they eat. There is global warming. How much global warming has happened has been hyped beyond belief, and I'm deeply embarrassed by the scientific community that talks about this. I've never seen so much disinformation in my entire life. I look at stuff, and it's just absolute crap. And it's clearly articles that are constructed in a political sense to make some point. I believe that if you consider carbon dioxide from fossil fuels as a cause and you take time zero as being 1960, which used to be and has now changed, that the Earth has gotten about 1 degree Fahrenheit warmer. The argument is, of course, how much warmer will it get? If you go study storms, which you can, I challenge you to go to NOAA, NOAA, right? They keep record of all storms. And go look at the last 20 years and see if there are more storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes, and if they're stronger, because they record the maximum wind. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. Go look at the graph, the real data from the real source, and see if you see it. I had trouble seeing it. And yet, every time something happens, oh my God, it's global warming. A guy backs his car into a fire hydrant. Look at that, global warming, the fire hydrant. So I don't think it's a tragedy. I think it is real. Nobody knows if it's really about carbon dioxide. It probably is, because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, does absorb infrared radiation and heat up the atmosphere. But none of those models they rely on that I'm aware of are really accurate enough. For example, you get in your airplane and you just go up and you measure the temperature gradient as you go up. It doesn't match up with the models. So I don't see a dire, like the Pelican in Lake Winnebago, I don't see a dire future. But people want less carbon dioxide. That makes sense. They want to stop burning fossil fuels. That's okay with me. So I am a free market capitalist. That's what they want. It's reasonable. I don't have to be in philosophical sync with them in order to make the stuff they want, make it reliable, and sell it to them. So that's where I'm on that one. By the way, the new beginning now goes back. The story is better if you go back to 1850, and then the amount of heating is doubled. It's like 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So then if you ask the question, well, we weren't creating any carbon dioxide back then. We weren't burning fossil fuel. What do you say about that? Oh, that's when we were deforesting. So it's part of the bad stuff man did. And you have the argument that doubles the figure. I don't buy it. Doesn't matter. The goal is reasonable. The cheapest form of energy we'll ever get does come from the sun, because fossil fuel is solar energy if you think about it. They grew plants. The plants got buried, and then they turned into oil and gas deposits. So it really is solar energy. And what we're doing is burning 10 years worth of old solar energy every year as we use that fossil fuel. And it's going to end anyway. So we might as well get a head start on it right now.
One last quick question I think we got time for.
Thank you, Mr. Rodgers, for coming back to Oshkosh. But a question I have for you, and that is this. Do you ever see the day when perhaps solar energy might be incorporated into the skin or fuel of a car to help either help run it or totally run the car? Do you see that as a possibility, or is that just too far in the future? In other words, it'd be collecting at all times, but to use it as a collector for the vehicle. Do you see anything like that?
Can a car run on solar energy that it collects on itself?
Yeah.
I don't think so. The sun's energy is 1,000 watts per square meter. Okay, so 1,000 watts, 746 watts is 1 horsepower. So a square meter is like 1 1/3 horsepower. If you take a car, say it's 2 square meters, you're getting 2.5 horsepower. So the energy of the sun, if you could harness it all, would give you about 2.5 horsepower. Now, okay, you take a car, when it's at highway speed and just keeping going, it can keep going at 10, 15 horsepower. So you could argue that a lot of what the car does could at 10 horsepower could be done on a highway with a collector. But then how do you get going? It would be 0 to 60 in long time. That wouldn't work. Second thing is the 1,000 watts per square meter, which is what comes out of the sun. It turns out that the usable fraction of it by collecting it with silicon. Now, it's possible we could change from silicon. I don't think so. The industry's too big. It's like saying, well, let's stop making cars out of steel. Great. We'll just shut down the Mesabi range in Minnesota. And oh, by the way, I need 700 tons of aluminum titanium alloy tomorrow. Where how do you get it? So on the 1,000 watts per square meter will get collected by silicon most likely, and that's only 20% efficient. So you get like 200 watts per square meter, and I'm an expert on that because I also was one of the founders. I was the founding chairman of SunPower Corporation, which is America's probably most famous solar company. Now you're down to, in 2 square meters, you get 600 watts. You're not running a car with 600 watts. And if you think about it, cars, if they run on petrol, it's probably years of sunshine on 2 meters that created the energy in the gasoline. So no, I don't see, there's not enough energy in sunlight to do that. So if you want to do it, you're going to have to store it and then use it, which you can, right? Electricity is a good way to store it, and charging a battery with electricity is pretty efficient. The round-trip efficiency of charging a battery is, pick a number, 90%. So you don't waste a lot of power. The power that's created, even it could be created with sun, but even burning fossil fuel generator is about 65% efficient. So whatever energy you put in the form of gas or oil is 65% turned into electricity. A car is about, on a good day, 25% efficient. So you're better off burning the gas, burning the petroleum product in a generator and transmitting power and storing the power. So that one I don't see you getting out of physics unless you get into some sort of nuclear power. There you can have a lot of power. You just think about looking at Main Street and seeing thorium-131, driving down Main Street and thinking if that's a good idea or not.
Well, folks, I think that's we're coming up on time, and you've been more than generous with your time today, TJ. So I want to give one gigantic thank you for you taking your time today.
Thank you.
Do you have any parting thoughts or words of wisdom for business leaders and entrepreneurs in our community here?
The biggest limits I see when I come back home is proposing something and getting an answer which is a self-limiting answer. We can't. See, I would like to do that. We can't do that because this barrier or that barrier prevents me from doing it. It's true in Silicon Valley. It's truer here. And I would urge you in your businesses not to think small. The edges of the country are running ragged right now, and you have a chance in the business sense of taking some share. Go ahead and take it.
Thank you so much. We have a special gift for you here, TJ. And this bottle of it's actually a vodka spirit that's flavored like whiskey. I know you're a wine guy and you got some good whiskeys over at the steakhouse, but this has an interesting story. It's from the Hendricks family farm right here in Eureka, and they did a presentation as well. And it would surprise me if you could taste vodka in that when you drink it. It tastes just like whiskey, and there's no hangover. So this is a very special gift for you, TJ. Thank you so much.
Well, I forgot. I didn't mention all of my companies. I actually am the largest investor in a whiskey company called Bespoken, and they make bourbon, and they make it from corn whiskey. Their deal is it goes from white dog, which is the spirit that comes out of the still, it's Bernie, into brown colored aged whiskey in 5 days. That's the chemistry stuff I was talking about before.
It's made of 100% potatoes. It's a vodka flavored like whiskey. It's aged in a barrel, and it's delicious. And it's right here in our backyard from the Eureka family farm that was started about 10 years ago. So it's really exciting. Just a small token of our appreciation we could give you.
Thank you. Actually, I'll do a taste test tonight.
Yeah. That's what it's all about. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you again, TJ, and thanks you, Felita and our staff. And I want to thank Elle as well for doing the video and the man behind the scenes on the audio, and my wife and baby in the back as well. So thank you so much, the Oshkosh Chamber. One more time.
Thank you. Thank you.